Sean and Alex, two brothers, have always loved scary adventures. Since childhood, they liked to go to abandoned places and film strange events. One night, they decided to go to an old and abandoned house in the suburbs, a house that no one dared to enter for years. Many legends were told about the house number 17. People used to say that anyone who enters there will never be the same person again. Some claimed to hear strange noises coming from inside the house at night, and even those who dared to look inside saw shadows in the darkness. But Alex and Sean thought these stories were just old superstitions. At 11 p.m., they entered the yard with flashlights and cameras. Its large and rusty door opened with an ear-splitting sound. The smell of damp and rotting wood filled the air. The light of their flashlight fell on the walls full of black spots. Well, it's just like any old house. No ghosts, no monsters, Sean said with a laugh. But at that very moment, the door behind them was suddenly slammed shut. Alex turned the light towards it, but no one was there. Their breath was trapped in their chest. They decided to film from the bottom floor and then leave quickly. But when they reached the main hall, they noticed that the floor was covered with muddy footprints. The problem was that these footprints only went in one direction in, but there was no sign of an exit. "We're not alone," Sean said with a shaky voice. Suddenly, heavy footsteps were heard from upstairs. It was as if someone was walking with bare feet on old wood. They slowly climbed the stairs. In the corridor, several closed wooden doors could be seen, but one of them was a little open. They threw the flashlight into the room, an empty room with an old bed and a large mirror right in front of the door. But when they looked in the mirror, there was a face staring at it. Sean turned the light back on, but nothing was there. "We have to go," Alex gasped. But when they came back, all the doors in the corridor started to slowly open. Sean screamed and ran for the stairs, but suddenly his foot caught on something and he fell to the ground. Alex tried to help him, but at the same moment, an invisible force grabbed Sean's leg and dragged him into one of the rooms. Alex screamed in terror and ran into the room, but Sean had disappeared. All he saw was a large mirror that no longer showed his image, but Sean standing in the dark, looking through the mirror with terrified eyes. Alex frantically touched the mirror, but the glass surface was cold and silent. Sean opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The only thing that appeared on the mirror was a sentence written in shaky handwriting. "They took him. It's your turn." Lights suddenly went out. Footsteps were heard behind Alex's head, and then Alex was sitting in his apartment one night and working on the phone when suddenly his phone rang. When he looked at the page, he saw his own number. He frowned. Was this a mistake, or was someone joking? He got curious and answered the call, but on the other side of the line, only the sound of breathing could be heard. "Hello, who?" Alex said, but there was no answer. A few seconds later, the call was disconnected. He felt bad, but decided to forget about it. He put the phone aside and started watching the movie again. But his phone rang again from his own number. This time he answered hesitantly and said, "Is this a joke? Stop it." But suddenly, on the other side of the line, he heard his own voice say softly, "Run up before it's too late." His heart sank. A cold sweat settled on his forehead. He got up and looked around. The apartment was very quiet and dark. Only the weak light of the TV was on the wall. Suddenly, the house lights flickered and went out. At that moment, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. Someone or something was in the room. He raised his phone to turn on the flashlight, but the screen was full of messages from his own number, sent one after the other. "Don't come back. "Don't come back, don't come back." His heart beat faster. He could not breathe, but damn curiosity made him come back. When he slowly turned his head, what he saw caught his breath. Another version of himself was standing there, but not quite like himself. His skin was pale, his eyes were black and dark, and his mouth was split up to the ears. Alex jumped back, startled. The other version laughed awkwardly and walked towards him. With every step he took, his body twisted as if his bones were broken. Alex ran to the door, but the handle wouldn't budge. The creature started running. A moment later, the house lights went out and a loud scream filled the air. The next day, Alex's friends came to his house, but there was no trace of him. The apartment door was open, the lights were off, and her phone was on the floor with a missed call from her own number on the screen. The police declared his case a mystery, but from the day on, some of his friends reported receiving calls from Alex's number. Each time, only one sentence was heard on the other end of the line: "Run before it's too late." David had just moved into an old house in the suburbs. A big house, a little run down, but a great price. The neighbors were a little weird when they saw him. They would give him a warning look, lock the door at night, and if you hear a noise, don't answer. David thought it was just a local superstition and didn't care. The first night was cold and quiet. He was sitting on the sofa and reading a book when suddenly there was a soft knock on the front door. David frowned. What was someone doing in his house at this time of night? He got up and looked through the door, but no one was there. He shrugged and turned, but just as he sat down, the knocking came again, louder this time. David went to the door and hesitantly opened it. There was no one, only the cold wind that shook the trees in the yard. He closed and locked the door. He tried to be indifferent, but he had a strange feeling. The feeling that someone was standing at the door watching him, even though he couldn't see anything. He could hear the sound of his heart in his ears. He turned on the TV to distract himself. Around midnight, as he was falling asleep, the sound of something being dragged across the floor came from the living room, like when they drag something heavy on a wooden floor. David held his breath. He slowly got out of bed and took his phone, but there was no antenna. He carefully crossed the corridor and went to the living room. The house was dark. Only the faint light of the moonlight shone in through the windows. Something was standing in the corner of a long shadow that shouldn't have been there. David froze. He could not move. The shadow slowly turned towards him. Now in the dim light he could see her face, but no face. Just a flat, dark, endless surface. David recoiled in horror, but the shadow disappeared, as if it was never there. He turned on the lights. The room was empty, but there were wet footprints on the floor, as if someone had entered with muddy feet. The next morning, his old neighbor said to him, "Now, he knows you are here. The next night, when he knocks, don't open the
door at any cost."
"Who?" David asked in horror, but the old man only smiled faintly and said quietly, "He who used to live here and still does not know that he is dead."